Senator Kelly read 6 allegations out loud. Hegseth had the same answer every time. He said he was an open book. Senator Mark Kelly had that quote with him when he sat down at the committee table. Hegseth had said it himself, "I sit before you as an open book." Kelly was about to test that claim one page at a time. He had other things with him too, a list of 6 specific allegations, dates, locations, named organizations, documented circumstances. He had the financial settlement record. He had the question he was going to ask last, the one about whether the answers would have been different under oath. Concerned Veterans of America, the organization at the center of those allegations, was a veteran advocacy nonprofit that Hegseth led for several years before entering television media. The organization's stated mission was policy advocacy on behalf of veterans, healthcare benefits, education, and government efficiency as it pertained to veteran services. It received significant funding from the Koch network and affiliated donors, operated out of Washington, D.C., and built its profile through a combination of policy work and public communications. Hegseth was its public face during a critical period of its organizational growth. He traveled on its behalf, spoke at its events, managed its staff, and represented the organization to veterans and their families across the country. That organizational context matters for understanding why the allegations Kelly raised carry the weight they carry. A leader of a veteran-focused organization who presides over a culture of intoxication at official events, who takes staff, including young women, to strip clubs on official travel, is not merely exhibiting personal misconduct. He is exhibiting conduct that is inconsistent with the stated values and institutional responsibilities of an organization that asks veterans to trust it with advocacy on their behalf. The veterans whose interests CVA claimed to represent were people who had served in institutions with strict conduct standards, institutions where the behavior described in Kelly's allegations would have resulted in documented disciplinary proceedings. Hegseth arrived at his confirmation hearing with a posture, composed, confident, the posture of someone who had decided on a strategy before the cameras turned on. He had supportive colleagues in the room. Senator Coleman had introduced him and framed his history as personal challenges overcome. He had arrived with prepared statements about his record of leadership. He had the general disposition of a nominee who believed that his path to confirmation was secure, which it was, and that the hearing itself was a performance to manage rather than an accountability proceeding to engage. The strategy was visible within his first responses. If anything uncomfortable arrives, characterize it as a smear campaign and move on. Do not confirm, do not deny, reframe, attribute to anonymous sources, pivot to colleagues who support you. Wait for the next question. The strategy works against most congressional questioning because most congressional questioning is not designed to make that strategy fail. Kelly's approach was designed specifically to make that strategy fail. He did not ask open-ended questions. He did not ask Hegseth to characterize his past behavior or explain his drinking or describe his leadership philosophy. He asked true or false questions, specific, dated, located, named, 6 of them in sequence, each one requiring a single-word answer, true or false. 6 questions, 1 answer. Anonymous smears. This channel tracks the documentation as it moves through the legal system. If you want to follow where this goes, subscribe and turn on notifications. New videos drop when the record produces something worth documenting. Let's start with the format, because the format is the argument. Mark Kelly is a Navy veteran and a former NASA astronaut. He is not a politician who arrived at this hearing from a distance from the subject matter. He has spent his professional life in institutions where personal conduct under pressure is not a matter of opinion, but a matter of documentation. In naval aviation, the performance of a pilot, a crew, and a commanding officer is measured and recorded with a specificity that civilian workplaces rarely match. Flight records, fitness reports, incident logs, safety documentation, the institutional culture of the military requires that what happens gets written down, that who was responsible for what outcome gets attributed, and that the record produced by those attributions travels with the person it describes. NASA compounds that culture. The space program operates on the premise that catastrophic failure is always possible and that the only defense against it is rigorous documentation of what was done, by whom, and under what conditions. Every mission produces records, every anomaly gets logged. Every decision made in a high-stakes environment becomes part of the institutional archive because the alternative, relying on memory and self-report, is understood to be inadequate when the stakes are high enough. Kelly spent years in that documentation culture, first in the Navy and then in the space program before entering the Senate. He brought that culture to the committee table, the true or false format, the dated, located, Specific allegations read from a list reflects the institutional logic of someone who has spent his career in environments where self-assessment is not a substitute for documented record, and where the question of whether a person is fit for authority is answered by what the record shows, not what the person says about themselves. He chose the true or false format deliberately. The true or false format eliminates the space that confirmation hearings typically provide for managing uncomfortable questions. In a traditional open-ended question, a nominee can answer the question they wish had been asked rather than the question that was asked. They can provide context, they can pivot to their record of achievements, they can reframe the specific as the general and the documented as the contested. They can speak at length about the many colleagues who support them, about the good work of the organization, about the unfairness of political attacks, and in doing so consume the members' limited time without ever addressing the substance of what was asked. True or false closes that space. It requires a witness to take a position on a specific factual claim. Either the thing happened or it did not. There is no middle option. The witness must commit to one of two answers. Any other response is a visible refusal to commit, which is itself a documented answer, the answer of someone who has decided that committing to either option is more dangerous than not committing at all. Hegseth found a way around it, but the way around it was visible. Hegseth found a middle option anyway. Anonymous smears is not true, it is not false, it is a characterization of the source. It says nothing about whether the described event occurred. It says only that the person alleging it should not be believed. That is a defense, not an answer. And it is a defense that only works if the audience accepts two things simultaneously. First, that the sources are actually anonymous, and second, that anonymous sources are inherently unreliable. The first premise was about to be tested by the financial settlement. The second premise is contested by the entire history of investigative reporting, whistleblower protection law, and congressional testimony from individuals who face professional retaliation for going on record. Kelly was about to demonstrate that not all of the claims were from anonymous sources, and that one of them had produced a legal document that had nothing anonymous about it. The first question, Memorial Day 2014. Kelly looked at his list. He read without inflection. At a CVA Concerned Veterans of America event in Virginia on Memorial Day 2014, Hegseth needed to be carried out of the event for being intoxicated. Hegseth said anonymous smears. The room registered that Kelly had asked for true or false and received neither. His tone didn't change. He said just true or false, very simple. He moved to the next item on the list. The second question, Summer 2014, Cleveland, drunk in public with the CVA team. Hegseth said anonymous smears. The repetition was already visible. The same phrase, the same posture. Kelly noted that he was asking for true or false answers. He did not argue the point. He moved on. The third question, North Carolina. An event in North Carolina where Hegseth was alleged to be drunk in front of 3 young female staff members after he had instituted a no-alcohol policy and then reversed it. Anonymous smears. That detail, the instituted and then reversed no-alcohol policy, is worth pausing on. If the policy was instituted and then reversed, the policy itself is documentable. Organizational policies are decisions with records. Who made the decision to institute the policy? Who made the decision to reverse it? When those decisions were made, those are facts that exist in the administrative record of the organization. The allegation about Hegseth's behavior at the event is the part attributed to anonymous sources. The policy change itself is not a matter of anonymous attribution. Kelly read the detail without pressing on it. He had 5 more items to get through in a limited time. The fourth question, December 2014, Grand Hyatt, Washington, D.C., the CVA Christmas party. Hegseth was noticeably intoxicated and had to be carried up to his room. Anonymous smears, 4 questions, 4 identical answers. The phrase was the same each time. Hegseth's posture was the same each time. Kelly's expression was the same each time. Kelly's tone throughout was level. He was not performing outrage. He was not escalating his voice or pressing into Hegseth's space. He was reading from a list and recording the responses. The discipline of that approach, treating each non-answer as equivalent documentation of what the hearing produced, is the technique of someone who has spent time in environments where emotional escalation is counterproductive and accurate record-keeping is the objective. The fifth question, the party bus. A CVA staffer stated that Hegseth passed out in the back of a party bus. Anonymous smears. 5 questions, 5 anonymous smears. Kelly looked at the 6th item on his list. The 6th question, Louisiana 2014. While on official business for CVA, did Hegseth take his staff, including young female staff members, to a strip club? Hegseth said, absolutely not. That is the only direct denial in the sequence, not anonymous smears. Absolutely not. The distinction between those two answers is significant and worth noting precisely. For the first 5 allegations, Hegseth's response characterized the source of the allegation. He said the sources were anonymous. He said the allegations were smears. But he did not say the events did not occur. He said the accounts were attributed to people he was declining to credit. For the 6th, he addressed the content of the allegation directly. He said it did not happen. The shift from source characterization to factual denial is a meaningful one in the context of a testimony where the previous 5 answers had avoided factual commitment entirely. Whether the shift reflects a difference in Hegseth's level of certainty about the 6th allegation versus the first 5, or whether it reflects a strategic decision that the strip club allegation was the one where a direct denial was most important, is not established by the transcript. What the transcript establishes is that he chose different language for the 6th question than for the 5 that preceded it. Then Kelly moved to the financial settlement. 6 allegations, 6 anonymous smears, now a document. And this is where the anonymous smears defense encounters a structural problem. Kelly said, "Is it accurate that the organization reached a financial settlement with a female staffer who claimed to be at a strip club with you, and there was a colleague who attempted to sexually assault her?" Hegseth said, "I was not involved in that." He did not say there was no settlement. He said he was not involved. Kelly followed up, "You understand there was a financial settlement for a young female staffer who accused another member of the organization, not you, of sexual assault in a strip club. We have multiple statements on the record referring to that." Hegseth said, "Absolutely not." 5 questions answered with anonymous smears, 1 answered with absolutely not. Then Kelly moved to the document. The anonymous smears defense works only against claims that come from sources who cannot be named and whose accounts cannot be independently corroborated. A financial settlement is not anonymous. It is a legal transaction. It involves parties, amounts, attorneys, signed documents, and a resolution that both sides agreed to. The settlement itself and the circumstances that produced it are documentable in ways that an individual's unattributed account is not. Kelly did not press into the specific details of the settlement's content. He established its existence. He established that it was associated with a female staffer, that it involved allegations of sexual assault by a colleague in the context of a strip club visit, and that Hegseth's account placed him as not there when it occurred, which directly contradicted the 6th question he had just denied. The logical structure of that sequence is what makes it significant. Hegseth said absolutely not to the question about taking staff to a strip club. The financial settlement, which Hegseth did not deny existed, was associated with a staffer who alleged she was at a strip club with Hegseth and experienced a sexual assault by a colleague. If Hegseth was not there and the settlement describes events at a strip club involving Hegseth's organization and female staff who were present, there is a factual contradiction in the record. Either Hegseth was there, which would make the absolutely not false, or the settlement describes events that occurred without him, which would require explaining how female staff from his organization came to be in that situation on what appears to have been an official trip. Kelly put that structure on the record. He did not resolve it. He did not need to. The contradiction is the document. The contradiction sat in the record. Then Kelly asked the question that made the entire exchange consequential beyond the specific allegations. "You've had issues with heavy drinking, you wrote about it. When asked about those issues, you blame an anonymous smear campaign, even when many of these claims are not anonymous. If you had to answer these questions about sexual assault and drinking and personal conduct, would it have been different if you were under oath?" Hegseth said, "All I'm pointing out is the false claims against me." Kelly said, "I take it you do not want to answer that question." Hegseth did not answer the question. Not anonymous smears this time, not absolutely not. Silence and then a redirection to false claims. The under oath question is the sharpest instrument in Kelly's line of questioning, and it deserves specific examination. Confirmation hearings are sworn proceedings. Witnesses take an oath before testifying. Hegseth was under oath when Kelly asked these questions. The distinction Kelly was drawing was not between sworn and unsworn testimony in a technical legal sense. He was asking whether the answers Hegseth was giving in that room would have been different if the threat of perjury were more viscerally present to him, if the consequence of answering falsely were more concrete than the consequence of answering with anonymous smears. Hegseth did not answer the question. That non-answer is a document. It sits in the transcript next to the question that produced it. The question asked whether Hegseth's testimony would have been different under more legally consequential conditions. He declined to say it would not have been. He declined to say it would have been. He said he was pointing out false claims. A person who believes their testimony is complete and accurate and who is asked whether it would have been different under more legally pressured conditions has an easy answer: no, nothing would be different because everything I'm telling you is true. The question is easy to answer for someone whose testimony is honest because the honest answer is simply, I'm telling you everything honestly now, and I would tell you everything honestly then. Hegseth did not provide that answer. He said he was pointing out false claims. That response does not address the question. It repeats the anonymous smear's characterization in different language. It does not say, no, my answers would be identical because they are truthful. It says the claims are false, which is what he had been saying for the previous 6 questions. The question was not about whether the claims were false. The question was about whether his answers were complete, whether there was a version of his responses that would have been more complete, more detailed, more direct, if the legal stakes of providing incomplete responses were higher. The non-answer to that question is the document Kelly was building toward. He said he was an open book. He would not say his answers would have been identical under oath. Those 2 positions are in the same transcript. Now let's examine the it can't be both argument, because Kelly ended his time with a formulation that is worth unpacking precisely. Senator Coleman, introducing Hegseth, said he has struggled and overcome great personal challenges. Hegseth had stated he sat before the committee as an open book. He had acknowledged heavy drinking in his past. He had framed his story as one of personal struggle overcome. The anonymous smear's defense requires a different framing. It requires the audience to accept that specific dated located allegations about drunken behavior are fabrications by unnamed sources with undisclosed motivations. That framing is incompatible with the personal challenges framing. If Hegseth struggled with alcohol, if the personal challenges Coleman referenced include documented episodes of intoxication that affected his professional conduct, then the allegations are not smears, they are the documented record of the challenges he claims to have overcome. If the allegations are smears, then there were no challenges. The drinking problem was not a drinking problem, the conduct was not misconduct, and the personal struggle narrative is a performance rather than a history. Kelly said, it can't be both. That logical formulation is not an accusation. It is an observation about internal consistency. The 2 narratives Hegseth was deploying in that hearing room, the personal struggles I overcame narrative and the anonymous smear campaign narrative, are mutually exclusive. Each one requires facts that the other one denies. The personal challenges narrative requires that specific episodes of problematic behavior occurred, that there was something real to struggle with, something concrete to overcome, a documented period during which Hegseth's conduct fell short of the standards he now claims to meet. That narrative requires the events to have happened. The smear campaign narrative requires them not to have happened, to be fabrications by unnamed sources for undisclosed political or personal reasons. You cannot simultaneously have overcome challenges that were real and be the victim of a smear campaign that invented them. If the challenges were real, the accounts of them are not smears. If the accounts are smears, there were no challenges to overcome. The logical formulation Kelly used has a parallel in the law of evidence, though he did not frame it as a legal argument. In proceedings involving credibility assessments, character evidence, and prior conduct, courts and attorneys deal regularly with the question of how a person's prior behavior is relevant to the credibility of their current claims. The principle Kelly was applying, that a person cannot simultaneously claim the benefit of a personal struggles narrative and the protection of a smear campaign narrative, maps onto the evidentiary principle that testimony about prior conduct that a witness has themselves introduced as part of their own story is subject to challenge on the basis of that same conduct. Hegseth introduced the personal challenges narrative as part of his confirmation presentation. Kelly challenged it using the documented record of the conduct that the challenges narrative implicitly acknowledged. Kelly left that logical structure in the record as his time expired. He did not receive a response that addressed it. He did not expect one. He said he was an open book. Kelly asked about 6 pages. Hegseth provided 0. The open book quote hangs over all of it. An open book by definition has pages you can read. Kelly read 6 of them and asked for confirmation or denial. Hegseth provided neither. The open book closed. The confirmation vote was not in doubt. Kelly had also asked at the start of his time for a second round of questions, the kind of extended questioning that confirmation hearings for senior defense officials have historically included. He cited the bipartisan staff agreement that had been reached to enable additional rounds. He noted that when Secretary Hagel was confirmed, there were 3 rounds of questioning. When Secretary Carter was confirmed, there were 2 rounds. Both of those precedents involved nominees for the same position, Secretary of Defense, before the same committee under different chairmanships. The chairman denied the request. There would be 1 round of 7-minute questions. The significance of that denial in the context of this specific hearing is worth examining. Hegseth had deployed the anonymous smears characterization as his response to specific, documented allegations. In a second round, Kelly or another member could have returned to those responses with the financial settlement documentation more fully laid out. could have pressed on the internal contradiction between the anonymous smear's characterization and the existence of a legal document, could have asked follow-up questions about the CVA's organizational records and the administrative trail that events like a policy reversal and an official Louisiana trip would have produced. A second round would have given the record more material. Its denial left the anonymous smear's characterization as the final word on each of those 6 allegations. That denial is its own document. It sits in the transcript alongside Kelly's 7 minutes and Hegseth's 6 anonymous smears. A nominee who was eager to demonstrate the openness he claimed, a true open book, would not have been disadvantaged by additional rounds of questioning. Additional time would have provided additional opportunity to provide the context and clarification, and on-the-record denials that 7 minutes did not permit. The denial of additional questioning rounds removed that opportunity from the record. The Republican majority on the committee confirmed Hegseth. The votes were secured before the hearing began. Kelly knew this. Every member in that room knew this. In theory, a Senate confirmation hearing is a deliberative proceeding in which senators evaluate a nominee's qualifications, fitness, and conduct, and reach a judgment about whether confirmation is appropriate. Witnesses provide information, questions produce answers. The record informs a vote that is not predetermined. That is the constitutional design. In practice, for nominees who arrive with the full backing of a president whose party holds the majority, confirmation hearings are documentation events. The outcome is not in question. The record is. Senators who oppose the nomination use their time to build the most complete documentary record of their objections that the hearing format permits, understanding that the record will outlast the hearing itself. Kelly used his 7 minutes for that purpose. He asked questions whose answers, or non-answers, would be available to future oversight committees, future investigators, future historians, and future journalists examining the conduct of the Secretary of Defense, whose confirmation hearing produced 6 instances of anonymous smears in response to 6 specific, dated, located allegations. The purpose of the confirmation hearing was not to produce a different outcome. It was to produce a record, and that is what happened. The record is the only thing a confirmation hearing that produces a predetermined outcome can reliably generate. When the votes are secured before the proceedings begin, when the majority has decided that the nominee's conduct and qualifications are sufficient regardless of what the minority produces in questioning, the hearing's function shifts. It is no longer a deliberative process in which undecided senators evaluate the evidence. It is a documentation process in which senators who oppose the nomination create a permanent record of their objections and the nominee's responses to them. Future oversight hearings, future accountability proceedings, future congressional investigations will have that record. It will show what was asked, it will show what was answered, it will show what was not answered. The record does not expire when the confirmation vote concludes. It becomes part of the archive that subsequent oversight will reference. Kelly understood that. He used his 7 minutes to build the most complete version of that record his time allowed. The record contains Kelly's questions. It contains Hegseth's 6 instances of anonymous smears and his 2 instances of absolutely not. It contains the financial settlement whose existence Hegseth did not deny. It contains the question about whether the answers would have been different under oath and the non-answer that followed it. It contains the request for a second round of questioning that the chairman denied. It contains the "it can't be both" conclusion that Kelly left on the record before his time expired. Hegseth was confirmed by the Republican majority. He is now the Secretary of Defense. The conduct described in Kelly's 6 questions, whether the events occurred or not, was not addressed, not confirmed, not denied. The anonymous smear's characterization was the record, and the record was sufficient for the votes that were already in place. The nomination that was always going to succeed produced a hearing that was always going to produce a record rather than an outcome. Kelly understood that. He built the record anyway. Hegseth is now the Secretary of Defense. The record is still the record. 6 questions, 1 answer. The book, he said, was open, stayed shut.